and welcome back to another episode of Beyond the To-Do List. I'm your host, Eric Fisher, and this is the show where I talk to the people behind the productivity. This week, I'm sharing with you a conversation I got to have with John Zeratsky. He's the co-author of the book Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day. And this is actually a pretty unique book and a unique approach to productivity, a unique approach to focus. And this is not their first book. This is actually their second book. Their first book was called Sprint. And by going through these design sprints, he and the co-author, Jake, learned a ton of stuff, and that's exactly what we get into in this conversation. I gotta admit, I get a lot of books pitched to me for this podcast, and I say yes to some of them. This one I said yes to, and it surpassed my expectations. It was a surprise hit in my mind. So this is actually a really great conversation. It's a really great book. I'm going to be going back through it again, and actually I'm going to talk about that in an upcoming solo podcast episode. This will be one of the topics. So pay attention to this one and enjoy this conversation with John Zeratsky. Well, this week it is my privilege to welcome to the show John Zeratsky. Welcome to the show, John.
Thanks, Eric. I'm excited to be here.
I hope I said your name correct.
You did, yeah.
Zeratsky.
Some people look at all the letters in my last name and they just get flustered and they give up. But really, if you look at the letters, there's only two ways to say it. It's Zeratsky or Zeratsky, and you picked the right one. So,
hey, there's another one, actually, Zeratsky. If you just say it,
yeah.
Anyway.
That's true, yeah.
I got it right. No need to dwell. But yeah. You co-wrote a book called Make Time, How to Focus on What Matters Every Day. And I wasn't sure by the title what exactly I was going to find in here, but you and your co-author have done something unique here where it's not about the concept of time in and of itself, which is one way you could have gone. And the other is, it's not just about carpe diem, and it's also not just about focus, So I
guess it's not about a lot of things.
It's not about a lot of things. And that's what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah.
No, cool. It's pleasantly surprising to me. We were actually kind of touching on this in pre-recording conversation to get something unique and new in the productivity space. And yeah, there are flourishes of things from all over the place, but we're all kind of coming to somewhat similar conclusions. But again, you've got something unique here that I had not seen per se. And so first off, you co-wrote this, and I would love to hear some of maybe the genesis of the idea or the catalyst as to why you and Jake thought that you needed to write the book, basically based on your own personal experiences. Like, what led you to the conversation where you both said, hey, we should write a book on this? Sure.
It's actually the second book that we have written together. A few years ago, we wrote a book called Sprint, which is all about this 5-day design sprint process that we developed while we were working together at Google Ventures, which is a venture capital firm funded by Google, invests money in companies outside of Google. And it was really, while we were doing that work, going into teams, people we had never met before, and sitting down with them and being like, what are your challenges? Like, what are you trying to do as a business? That we realized that some of the things that we had been feeling about working in technology and having this unique perspective of like knowing that to some extent we're designing products that are distracting to people, that are sort of sucking up people's time. But on the other hand, being really in the epicenter of the always on, always connected, nonstop, highly optimized and productivity obsessed work culture, we noticed that these teams we were going in to help, they had a lot of the same challenges, even if they were small teams, even if they were two people who had literally just started their business. And so that was really enlightening for us. And we had, in our work running these design sprints, we had the chance to basically experiment, take our ideas that we had each been formulating as individuals for years and go into a team and say, hey, what would happen if we cleared your calendar for a week and we had the whole team together in one room? And what would happen if instead of trying to reach consensus in a meeting, we gathered input from everybody and then had the decision maker make a call. And a lot of things like that. What would happen if we didn't use email to move this project forward? A lot of questioning of defaults. And that was really where we came together and said, hey, these ideas have some universal appeal. And I wonder if we could take what we're learning in this team environment and apply it to ourselves as individuals.
That's great. I love that phrase, questioning the defaults.
Yeah, that's a big part of what this book is about, and really what all of my work on this stuff has been about. There's so many things. I mean, this show is called Beyond the To-Do List, and the to-do list, I think, is a perfect example of something that's just a default. You sort of assume if you're a productive person who is going to be on top of your work and on top of your life, and you're going to have your act together, you got to have a to-do list. But I found that I did better work and I'm happier and time moves more slowly when I don't have a to-do list. And there are dozens or maybe hundreds of defaults like that, some that are technology things, some that are sort of corporate culture things, some that are just expectations we have as a society. And I think the process of looking at those and questioning them and maybe trying to replace them with something that's a little more, I don't know, gentle and a little more human can really enable us to do good things with our time.
Yeah, I think that what you're getting at is somewhat the problem of there's nothing wrong inherently with a to-do list. It's that we then generally seek to overload them. And the load it then overloads us. Right?
I think at its core, it's a list. And yes, certainly there is nothing wrong with a list. I think the frustrations that I've felt, and I think a lot of people feel with to-do lists, is that they become, as you said, so overloaded with importance and significance that we think that managing the list and checking items off the list is the work, when really the work is the work. And they tend to reward small items. They tend to encourage us to estimate how long things are going to take. And there's a lot of research showing that humans are terrible at estimating things and predicting things. So there are a lot of problems, I think, with to-do lists. But as you pointed out, they don't come from the notion of having a list of things. They come from all of the baggage that we have tried to strap on to these to-do lists over the years.
Yeah, I mean, people have had to-do lists for centuries, Benjamin Franklin on, back in time. And it's like, Benjamin Franklin wasn't like overwhelmed. I mean, maybe it's hidden in the pages of Sir Richard's Almanac somewhere. He's cueing us in. But I mean, we just don't think about that. It's more of a modern thing, a modern, overload problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the tools have gotten supposedly more sophisticated, which I think is they've really just gotten kind of fancier and more complicated. But the tools have expanded in ways that are kind of neat and clever, but not necessarily effective. And at the same time, we have this culture that seems to value responsiveness and values always being as productive as possible. And all these things are reinforced by new types of communication tools. So it's really, I have this feeling that this problem of how do we spend time on the things that are important to us? I feel like this problem is accelerating. It's getting worse. And so that's one of the reasons why I've been spending so much of my time trying to slow that down and trying to help people kind of pull back and step back from that.
Yeah. If the sprint book was geared towards being able to duplicate that design sprint process for people who had not ever done that, then this lack of focus or lack of progress or whatever you want to call it. I mean, how would you succinctly say what the problem is that this book is then tackling?
Yeah. I would say that this book is helping people who feel busy and distracted, whether that's all the time or just some of the time, reclaim control of their energy and their attention so that they can actually make time for the things that matter to them, the things that they want to be doing.
And that's not just, in your career, in your work life, in your daily, in your 9 to 5, but it's also, at home and on the weekend. It's a whole life. It's a holistic thing. It's not, what matters every day isn't just a business book, in other words.
Yeah, that is totally true. And while make time is for your entire life, it is not meant to contain your entire life. And by that, I mean, there's going to be lots of little stuff you got to do, emails you got to reply to, meetings you got to go to. There's going to be things on your to-do list that you got to get done that are, make time doesn't necessarily provide a system for managing those. I think there are a lot of great systems and tools out there for those things, but it's really to help you at that bigger picture level, look at how you're spending your time and make some tweaks to some of the defaults that kind of control how you spend your time, making your phone less distracting, trying to, instead of spending all day in your email, have certain times of day when you're in your email, scheduling things that are important to you rather than just letting your schedule sort of fill up. It's really about, at a high level, questioning these defaults so that you can make sure that even with all the little stuff you have to get done, there's going to be a chunk of time every day for the thing that's really important to you. And like you said, that could be at the office. And I think sometimes people look at this book and they say, oh, it's about work-life balance. And it might be, but if the thing that you care the most about is work, then that's awesome. You pour your energy into that. I think that make time can really help you do that. And I go through phases of my life, and I know Jake goes through phases of his life where that's very much the spirit. You're very much into your work and using this system to really just try to pour your energy into that. But sometimes it's about making time for things outside of work, making sure that when you get home from the office, you're not just kind of plunking down and switching on TV and catching up on, Facebook or Twitter. But, if you had been meaning to cook dinner, or you'd been meaning to repaint a bedroom or reorganize a closet, or, something, little stuff like that, not life-changing stuff, but stuff that you've just been meaning to get around to, make time is really about helping you make those decisions so that you can have time for those things.
Yeah. And even unintentionally working on, quote, one area of your life, though we're not as compartmentalized as people think, it spills over into the other areas.
Yeah, that's true. One of the so what we've been talking about these last couple of minutes here is what in the book we call it a highlight. It's the idea is that if you look back on your day and you ask yourself, what was the highlight of my day today? We feel like every day should have an answer. We don't want to have this feeling where time is slipping by. You look back and you say, what did I really do? What did I accomplish? That's not the path to feeling good about your time. That's not the path to forming memories. That's not the path to spending time on substantial, valuable work. And that idea of the highlight, it can really help keep life in balance. And I can give you an example, just recent example from my own life. A couple weeks ago, my wife and I had planned to go to a baseball game. We live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the Brewers are having a good season. I don't know exactly when this will air, but they as we're recording this, they're in the playoffs, which is pretty exciting. And we had planned to go to a game a couple weeks ago, one of the final regular season games. We were going to go with Michelle. That's my wife, Michelle's family. And it was an evening game. But it was the day before I was going to fly out to San Francisco to do some book marketing activities, give some talks and things like that. And so I had a bunch of stuff to do. I had a finite set of things. I had a to-do list of things that needed to get done that day. But I made that baseball game my highlight because I knew that if I had that to look forward to, and if that was the priority, I could plan the rest of my day around that activity. So even though I had all this work to do, and even though, at a rational level, I could have made the case that the baseball game is not the most important thing, I decided to change my mindset, because I knew that if I told myself that the baseball game was my highlight, if that was the most important thing, then I would do a better job with all the stuff I was doing during the day. And then B, when the end of that day did arrive, I would have this feeling of like, okay, I did what I could do, and now I'm here to enjoy the game, instead of like, oh, I pulled the plug and ran out of the office at the last second just so I could make it to the game on time. And that's kind of a nuanced thing, but those types of decisions for me can completely change the way that I feel about a day.
That is a great illustration of how the first component of the 4 components that make up this new approach that you talk about in the book works out. And I love the fact that your highlight for that day was not this like, okay, my highlight for today is this one thing at work that I'm going to make sure I finish, which is perfectly okay, by the way.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of my highlights are things like that. I just today, I'm putting out a design sprint workshop. So the design sprint process that I talked about, Jake and I, we both teach people how to run those design sprints. And I'm putting on a workshop in Minneapolis in late November. And today we just announced that was going to happen. I posted the page online where people can learn about it and buy tickets. And that was my highlight. And we find that those type of kind of medium-sized, 1 to 2 hour sort of chunks of work that are meaningful and valuable and you can sink your teeth into make for great highlights, because they're small enough that you can kind of fit them in. You by rearranging things or by keeping your email closed or keeping your phone put away somewhere, you can usually make time for them. But they're big enough that they become those anchors for the day. They become those things where you can look back and say, yep, on Tuesday, that was the day that we launched the workshop. And that just makes time feel like it's not running away, racing by.
Yeah. And so here's the thing, like the first, so we're talking right now about the highlight. And again, like I said, this is one of 4 pieces. I think what would be almost like a natural flow to the conversation, which is never something that you should say out loud as an interviewer. It's like calling the play by play as you go through a conversation. But I want to highlight, ironically, the fact that we're doing that because I think this makes a lot of sense. I would love to dive into a couple of different questions on defining how do you define what your, what's the best approach maybe to defining what your highlight is for every day, and then move into tactics for protecting that highlight, and then do the same for the other 3: laser, energize, and reflect.
Yeah. And maybe before we go deeper on highlight, I can just give a quick overview of the 4 steps.
Yes. Yeah. So let's go macro and then we'll drill down a little bit into each of them.
Yeah. Sounds good. So the first step, as we've been talking about, is proactively choosing a highlight for your day. It's something that needs to get done, could be something that you just want to get done, or something that's just plain fun to do, something that makes you happy. And it's not the only thing that you'll do that day, but it's the thing where you really focus your energy, really plan your day around it. The next step is called laser, and it's all about beating distraction by making changes to how you use technology. And you might think that this step should come first, right? That you need to sort of lock down distractions so that you have the time. We have found that when you start with that motivation, you start with that highlight, it makes it easier to make these changes to your technology. It gives you that motivation. It gives you that sense of like, why am I uninstalling Twitter from my phone? Why am I staying logged out of my email when I'm not actually answering email? Little changes like that do require kind of a burst of energy to get over the hump. But then once they're in place, they tend to be kind of self-sustaining. So the second step is laser. Third step is called energize. And it's really about recognizing that to make good use of our time, we need energy. And the energy that we need comes from taking care of our bodies. So it's about focusing on basics of food and sleep and exercise, and even things like spending face-to-face time with other people and finding quiet. that really give us energy to make the most of our time. And then the fourth step is to reflect each day on how that day went. And this is not some big, crazy journaling exercise. It's really just about looking back and asking yourself, what was my highlight today? Did I have time for it? What did I try in terms of the tactics that are described in the book or other things? What did I try to, what actions did I take to try to make time? And how did they go? If they went well, then cool. And if they didn't go so well, are there different things I want to do tomorrow? And this takes just a couple of minutes. And we find that having this experimental mindset to our time and our energy and our focus every day really helps people make a lot more progress than they would if they were trying to white knuckle their way through some, 17-part system that they had to get absolutely perfect. So those are the 4 steps of Make Time.
And it's incredibly simple. Like as we go through it, like it's really just, okay, highlight, laser, energize, reflect, repeat. It's almost the missing step.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, and that's totally it. And that repeat is really behind a lot of the philosophy. It's like you can't screw it up, and even if you feel like you kind of had a bad day where you didn't make time for the things you wanted to do, tomorrow's a new day. And it's not about getting the system exactly right. It's about getting into a routine and a habit of thinking about this stuff and making changes to try to make better use of your time. And so, yeah, I love that. Step 5, repeat.
The reflect step then helps you to clarify and continually learn how to better choose your highlights as you move forward. But do you have any best practices as far as like choosing, whether it's the launching of a thing like you were describing that you did today, or making sure that your highlight is that game or anything in between?
Sure. At this point, I've been planning my days this way for a long time, for years, really. And so it's very intuitive. I think about what I want my highlight to be, but I don't really have a system I go through. I just kind of know, as mysterious as that sounds. But we do provide a few different strategies in the book that we do use, and that we especially used to use when Jake and I were first developing this idea. One of them is the strategy of urgency. So it's really just looking through calendar, to-do list, whatever you have, email, and picking out that thing that really needs to get done that day. Sometimes I have found working, especially in like an office environment where I have a lot of meetings, that I can sometimes get to the end of the day without having made time for the thing I really need to do that day. It's like at the end of the day, you're like, okay, finally I'm done with all this work stuff. Now I can finally get this work done. And nobody wants their day to go that way. So when you do have that thing that must get done, being proactive about it and trying to build your day around it rather than squeezing it into the cracks in between meetings can really be helpful. The second strategy is all about satisfaction. And so an example for this might be if you had an idea for something new at work, like a new project or a new way of solving a problem that the business was facing. Nobody's asking you for that. There's no deadline for that idea. It's something that you just want to put out there. But that when you do, it's going to be very satisfying. You're going to feel a sense of accomplishment. You're going to feel a sense of pride that you did it. And so prioritizing those non-urgent but still super important things by making them your highlight can also be a really great way of feeling like you made good use of your time, especially at the office, but at home as well.
Yeah. And
then the third strategy is looking for highlights that will bring you joy. And that's where the baseball game comes in. Things that are just plain fun. If you feel like those activities often get pushed to the margins of the day, or you never even really get to them, you think you're going to go to bed early and read a book, but then you look at the clock and it's 11 o'clock and it's too late and you need to get to bed. If that's the situation you find yourself in, using your highlight to choose joyful activities can make sure that those types of things get their space and their due in your day.
And do you find that you're able to, or see, I'm trying not to systematize this too much. I'm trying to leave it very intuitive. I think that was the best way that you put it is, for me, naturally, I'm almost going to think, okay, I'm going to look ahead at the calendar and say, ooh, there's like, for example, this coming Friday night, my wife and I are going to do something that night. I would make that my highlight, and that's days in advance. Is that something that's, quote, okay to do?
That is not something that I personally do. I mean, there's definitely things that I look forward to. There's things that, all sorts of plans, things at work, things outside of work that I look forward to. But I do think there's something about the highlight being a daily activity that is really healthy. I think we touched on this earlier. There's a bunch of research, and I think we can sort of intuitively, we can feel that humans are maybe not so great as predicting the future as we would like to be, or would like to think that we are. And if you're choosing a highlight for the end of the week, you're sort of predicting your future. You're sort of saying, well, I know how I'm going to feel in the future. And I think that we can be more honest with ourselves and have a higher success rate in terms of making good use of our time if we treat that highlight as a daily thing. Because then we can check in with ourselves every day. We can say, how am I feeling today? Am I in a mental space where I really want to be pouring my energy into work because I've got something cool going on, something exciting, something that's urgent, there's a deadline coming up? Or is the week winding down? It's the end of the week. I'm kind of in more of a mental space where I'm ready to relax and focus my energy on doing something fun. So I would never tell you what's right or wrong, because that is just not, I don't think that's a productive way to approach these types of things, which are so personal and so human. But I would say that for me, I really appreciate the day by day practice of choosing a highlight for the day that's coming ahead.
Gotcha. Okay. So keep it more, in that cycle, like we were saying, is, in the repeat is, okay, reflect on what today's was that the right choice? Yes or no? And then are you deciding that evening what tomorrow's is, or are you doing that the next morning?
For me, it's either the evening or the morning, kind of depends on what's going on. If I know that the next morning I have wide open, which is really what I shoot for. I try to wake up early every morning, have some coffee right away, and spend at least a couple of hours on my highlight, working on something important. And that doesn't always happen. I'm not perfect. These things don't always work out exactly the way that I imagine they will. But if I know I have a day like that coming up, then I do tend to think about it more the night before. I think, I sort of think to myself, all right, tomorrow I'm going to wake up, and I don't want to have that temptation or that urge to hop on Twitter or hop on Facebook or whatever. I want to wake up with a really clear idea, a really clear highlight that I'm going to spend my time on. And so in those cases, I'll think of it the night before. But if I have more of what you might imagine is sort of a conventional work day that's got a bunch of different stuff, it's got some meetings, it's got some smaller little projects, then I'll think about it more in the morning as I'm kind of mapping out a plan for the day.
Gotcha. Okay. So then making sure that we get the highlight done is essentially what laser is all about. It's getting rid of distractions. It's honing in specifically on what tools are needed. What am I leaving out here in terms of what laser is about?
Yeah, the essence of laser is about really making it more difficult to get distracted. So if you think about whether it's Instagram or email or Netflix, all of these products have been engineered and designed to be as friction-free as possible. I mean, if you're watching Netflix, it literally starts playing the next episode as soon as the previous one finishes. It doesn't get more friction-free than that. There's not even the traditional commercial break from broadcast TV where you can get up and remove yourself from the environment. And that's true of all the we call them infinity pool apps. These websites, apps that have basically an endless source of really, or at least potentially really interesting content in them. And I should say that part of what is unique about this book is that Jake and I both helped to design some of those apps. I was at YouTube for a couple of years as a designer. Jake worked on Gmail during his time at Google. So I think we know from the inside just how kind of tuned and optimized these things are.
Yeah.
So the essence of laser and the tactics in the book that we provide for helping you find laser mode, that laser-like focus, is putting barriers in so that it's more difficult to get distracted.
I think it's funny that we talk about putting barriers in, where it's like, why would you want to have a barrier? Well, it's a guardrail. It's a, I bumped up against it and now I'm not going over the cliff,
Yeah, totally.
All right. So, and I think, here's the thing, like we've talked a lot about this actually on this show before previously with eliminating distractions and, getting your focus time and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be completely contextual. Let's put what type of laser you use. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah.
Based on what highlight you've chosen, right? Like it's going to be a contextual thing. It's very, again, like you said, it's intuitive.
Yeah, that is true. Although I do think that one of the almost universal feelings that people have today, that we all have, is that a lot of our time just seems to get sucked away. I think probably anybody listening can relate to that feeling of picking up your phone to do something and then realizing that half an hour later you just spent that time doing who knows what. Maybe you meant to look something up and you happen to notice there was the red circle was on the corner of the Facebook app, so you popped over there to see what it was or something like that. So I think that everybody can benefit from thinking about what those apps or those services or products or websites are that are kind of our distraction kryptonite, that thing that it's our weakness. We often find ourselves mindlessly spending time on. I think we can all benefit from trying to identify what those are and putting those guardrails into place. Like you said, trying to make it more difficult to get distracted by those things. And for me, probably the prime example is Twitter. And it's not that I spend more time on Twitter than something else like email. It's just that it's the thing that I feel the worst about after I have this mindless session. And so what I've done to control that is remove Twitter from my phone. So I don't have the Twitter app installed on my phone. And then I have changed my password for Twitter, for twitter.com, and changed it to like a random string, basically, that I store in a password manager app. So I use 1Password for that.
Yeah.
And I stay logged out of Twitter. So I definitely still use Twitter, and Twitter is a really important tool for me for spreading the word about the writing that I'm doing and answering questions and talking to folks who are reading what I put out there, which I really appreciate and I find very fun and very rewarding. But what I do is I just have certain times of day where I kind of plan to go onto Twitter. And so when I do that, I have to go grab that password from the password manager. I have to log into Twitter, and I only do it on my computer. I don't do it on my phone. And just having those guardrails in place helps me get the best of that tool. I get the best parts of Twitter still, and it's useful for me, and it's still enjoyable, and I look forward to that time. But I never find myself, or I should say almost never find myself mindlessly or unconsciously checking it.
Yeah, you've built up so many different hurdles that you have to jump through, whether it's time restriction or just logging in and even not being able to just pull your phone out as tactile an experience as that is, and which lends to its addictivity is not a word, lends to its highly addictive nature.
Yeah.
I appreciate, and see, so then the thing is some people are like, well, Twitter's not really my issue. It's this other thing. And there you go. Like, it's a unique scenario. It's a unique situation. For me, I can keep Twitter on my phone and not check it all day long over and over and over again.
Right.
It's probably something different, and I don't know what that would be right now, because I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So actually, I've taken some of these steps that you're persuading us to do. So, what are some of the other ones that, is there another one where it's again, it's not just about putting up the barriers. It's almost like there are some probably you have to go nuclear with and just say, no, this one's not allowed at all. Right.
Yeah. And that's one of the most powerful tactics in the laser section is this idea of a distraction-free phone. And this is really about removing from the phone or disabling anything that's an infinity pool app. So anything that has an endless source of content. So I already mentioned Twitter, but it's also Instagram and Facebook. It's games. It's the news, which has particularly strong cultural expectation that if you're a grown up, if you're, a productive member of society, you're going to follow the news. But we don't need to see the constant breaking news on our phones. So removing that, the ability to check the stock market, and even removing email. So
yeah,
I don't have email on my phone, and I didn't for many of the years I was working within Google, working at big tech company where there's a lot of email, and it's not about, similar to what I was saying about Twitter, it's not about not using it or going completely dark or cold turkey. It's really about trying to reframe the relationship so that you're using it in good ways and using it for the things that it's good for, rather than letting it use you.
One of the ways that I've found for the weekend is I won't delete the apps, but I'll on iOS there's this option to offload an app. So all your data, all your login is maintained and all your, user interface type stuff. Basically, the app's there, but it's a hollow shell of the app. It just maintains your login and all that, but you can't use the app until you re-download it. And so, one of my things for Friday afternoons for the weekend is my shutdown on Friday is to offload on my social media for the weekend.
That's great.
So, and it's happened where, like, on a Saturday, I'll have my phone and I'll open it up and I'll tap Facebook, and then it'll start the download of Facebook. And I'm like, whoa, hold a sec.
That's not what I wanted.
I can tap it again, hit cancel download, and boom. Okay, good. I'm glad that was there. So
yeah, that's great. That's super interesting. I actually didn't know that was possible. I use an Android phone.
Yeah.
And I didn't know you could do that. But I love that, especially the way that you do it, which is you make it a ritual. It's part of winding down for the week, or you could do it for winding down the day too if you wanted. But I think that one of the things that is so challenging in our world today is that all this stuff is on all the time. It's available all the time. There is no natural rhythm of when the mail gets delivered or when the newspaper gets delivered. I mean, those things obviously still happen, but most of what we are interacting with, most of the information that we are able to access is always available. It's always there. It's always being replenished. And so I love that idea of restoring some of that natural rhythm of the end of the day, the end of the week, the weekend. That's a really cool idea.
Yeah. And so that actually ties right into the next step, which is energize. This is huge to be able to actually take steps to do this.
It is. Energize is really about making sure that you have the energy to make good use of that time. So if you've chosen a highlight that is to, you're going to have some friends over for dinner and you're going to make dinner. You don't want to get to that highlight, that chunk of your day, and feel totally wiped and totally worn out or frazzled or kind of fragmented. You want to have the energy to be there. And that's true when you're getting something done at work. It's true when you're when something urgent comes up. It's true when you're doing something that's fun and you want to enjoy it. And this was a big lesson for us from running all the design sprints, because a design sprint is fairly intense. It's 5 days. The team is in the room from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. each of those 5 days. They're not doing any of their normal meetings or any of their normal work when they're in this design sprint with us. And we would find in some of our early sprints that we would get to the end of the week and people were just like running on empty. They had so little energy. They were more likely to be distracted, to kind of mindlessly pick up their phone or open their laptop and start to look at something else that would really take them out of the room, even though they were physically in the room. And so we started to experiment with things like having the team break for lunch and like actually go walk somewhere as a group and sit down and eat face to face. And we actually shortened the day. So when we started doing sprints, it was much more like a 9 to 5 or sometimes even 9 to 6 day. But shortening it down to make it 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. actually allowed us to get the same amount of stuff done, but people just felt better at the end of the week. This lesson that we learned from the design sprints is something that Jake and I have focused on a lot as individuals. And we found that kind of just taking care of our human bodies really has a big effect on our feelings of having control over our time and our attention.
Yeah. And it's not, the thing is, we've talked about this subject in different forms, whether it's rest or, sleep or taking breaks or having rhythms and routines. Energize comprises all of those things, but we've never really actually on this show talked about the direct correlation to then, hey, for this being for being able to be specifically optimized for your highlight, for getting that thing done. Again, picking one, being laser focused on it in whatever manner or form that takes, that's fine. But then if you don't have the energy for it, then what was the point?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I've certainly felt there's been a lot of cases in my life, and this happens all the time, where there's a moment or there's something that I'm doing that I feel like I'm not fully there for. I'm not fully present, and some of that is because I'm distracted, because my mind is elsewhere. But a lot of it also comes down to energy, and so I think the benefit of focusing on building that energy is that you feel more present. You feel like you can enjoy that time more, whatever that thing is you're doing. But I think it also makes it easier to push back against some of these really distracting and really compelling infinity pool apps. One of our philosophies is that we should try to take willpower and self-control out of the equation whenever possible. And so, for example, it's instead of hiding Twitter away in a folder that's 3 home screens to the right on your phone, it's like just remove the app entirely and change the password so that you're not having to constantly exercise that willpower. That said, unless you physically, go live in a cave or something like that, there's always going to be some amount of self-control that is required to keep these tactics working, to keep this system going. And I've found that comes directly from having energy. If I have one of those mornings where my plan is to wake up early and get some work done, but I stay up too late or I drink a little bit too much, then I'm more likely to wake up the next morning and say, oh, I'll do a quick check of Twitter, or I better see what's going on in the news. Sort of your ability to make the decisions that you want to be making gets weakened when you don't have great energy.
Yeah, we make, I know that there's some sort of statistic out there when it comes to, for example, lack of sleep, to where then the next day, if you're operating on less sleep than you need, you're effectively drunk to a certain extent.
Yeah, I think there's been some studies about that with driving specifically, and how if you're short on sleep, it's the equivalent of having 2 drinks or something like that. And yeah, I mean, when it's framed in that way, it's kind of scary. And I think it's, when you're looking at something like hanging out with friends or being at work, it's not as scary because, it's not life or death, but I think we can still see the connection there. We can understand that those moments are not as good. They're not as valuable when we're wiped out.
Yeah. And we could dive into a ton more tips and tricks in terms of like what to do with energizing and all that kind of stuff. But, and I've got a ton of other episodes that are really specifically for that. So cool. I'll pick a few and I'll link to those in the show notes for this episode where you can dive in deeper in terms of that.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, but I think, one thing that is important to say, because we haven't really said it yet, is that so the book is made up of these 4 steps: highlight, laser, energize, reflect. But in addition to the 4 steps, there's a menu of tactics. So a lot of these little things like the distraction-free phone are examples of tactics that are in the book. And the best way to think about it is really like a cookbook. So a cookbook, it might be a cookbook of healthy Asian cooking or, whatever. It has a theme, right? And so Make Time has a theme, which is really about questioning these defaults and making decisions to prioritize the things you want to do. And these 4 steps are meant to take you through that process every day. But then the tactics are kind of like the recipes in the cookbook. You're not gonna pick up the cookbook and immediately try to cook everything. You're not gonna make it a mission to cook every single recipe as quickly as you can. It's more about kind of flipping through and finding the specific tactics for building energy, or the specific tactics for creating time in your day for that highlight that you think might work for you, and then relying on the 4 steps, that daily process, to hone in on the ones that work best.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, and again, it's this whole personalization aspect of it where it's, again, one size does not fit all. So
absolutely. Jake and I
you've got to try it on.
Totally. When we were writing this book, we had a conversation where we decided that if somebody read the book and they used the steps, but they didn't use any of the tactics, right? They had their own ways of deciding what they wanted to focus on and defeating distraction and whatever. Yeah. That would be success, right? It's not about people using our specific tactics, our specific activities, concrete things. It's really about the mindset and the approach and the process. And so if people are doing that and it's working for them, we could not be happier.
Yeah, that's great. Well, and so then the process still completes with this final step of reflection, which we kind of touched on when it comes to picking a highlight and then at the end of the day, reflecting and deciding or analyzing or, whatever word is best for you. Was that highlight the right highlight? What's my next highlight, or what are my possibilities for my next highlight? But then also, reflect encompasses laser and energize as well.
We hope that people will use that reflect step to not just think about their highlight, but think about those tactics that they've been trying. Mm-hmm. An example for me might be, I have this tactic of logging out of Twitter, to change my password, log out. And if I have a day where I found myself on Twitter a little bit more often, I might note that when I reflect. I might say, I tried this tactic, log out, but it wasn't working great. Why is that? Is there something else I can try? Is there another tactic I can use to make sure that I'm not wasting time in a way that makes me unhappy? Yeah. So it's really about reflecting on the highlight, but also being in this experimental mindset about the specific tactics, the really concrete things that you're doing in your day to try to work toward a life where you feel like you're spending time on the things that are important to you.
It almost feels like each day then is a sprint. And at the end of the day, you say, okay, how well did my sprint go? What can I adjust?
Nobody has said that, but that is super interesting. And the part of why it's interesting is that the idea of reflecting is also a lesson from our design sprints,
Right.
because we ran so many design sprints with so many different companies that at the end of every week, we would look back and we would say, how did it go? Like, what happened, and how can we make it better next week? And that just worked so well in that environment that we started to use it for ourselves. A lot of people who are trying to make their lives better, get control of their time, they might be interested in scientific studies, research that's going on, and that stuff is all really interesting and really can be really valuable to read about a study. And we've touched on a couple of those things in this conversation, but the experiment and the results from that experiment that you get when it's just you, when you're testing on yourselves, it's an experiment with an N of 1. That is the data that is most valuable, because it's true. It applies to you, and you can put it into use right away, literally the next day.
Well, and it's a lot more personal. It's a lot more personally applicable, even.
Right.
I guess, it's your life, and it's improving your life one day at a time, which sounds so cliche to say, but that's exactly what it is. I mean, it's intervals. It's literally one day at a time, taking the day, going through the sprint, and then saying, okay, how did I do? So
yeah,
it's actually pretty simple. Like it's we make it out to be so much more complex than it actually is. Anyway, John, I mean, it's been awesome talking with you. I'm going to be going through, and I think for me specifically, the piece that's missing out of these three really is the reflection piece at the end of the day. So that's going to be where I'm going to start making my changes. I think the highlight piece is there to a certain extent. Probably there's some work there to be done. But again, I love the kind of holistic, or again, you used the word intuitive, where it's like, don't get so hung up on it. Don't make it so systematized that it's like feels like homework,
or it feels daunting. Like, I have to figure out what is the one thing that's going to change the course of my life forever.
If I don't figure out my highlight, I don't know what I'm going to do. Yeah. And that's got to be the approach. I like that you kept it that way, that simple, that approach. So, the book is out now, so I'll link it up in the show notes. Anywhere you want to point people to so they can take a look and check it out some more?
Yeah. The website for the book is maketimebook.com, and we've got a bunch of cool stuff there. You can actually look inside the book. We've got some renderings of the interior. There's a bunch of links to tools, things that we suggest, things that are mentioned in the book, as well as a bonus pack. So if you buy the book, you're going to get a discount off of everything from coffee beans to Freedom, which is an app that helps lock you out of certain distracting websites. So a bunch of good stuff there, maketimebook.com. And then perhaps ironically, I would encourage folks to follow me on Twitter.
That's great.
Despite the endless temptation
for when you check it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Jazzer, Jazer. That's my username, and I like Twitter. It can be challenging to keep it inside of bounds, but I enjoy it, and I really, really enjoy hearing from people who have questions about the stuff, want to talk about it, read the book, and want to give feedback. So I would love to have some conversations there.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll link to that in the show notes as well. One thing I want to say about the book, I love that you've got all the different artwork. Doesn't do it justice. It's illustrations. It's information displayed in visual manners is probably the best way I can put it. It's some of it's drawings. It's cartoonish at times. It's hand drawn. It's personal. It breaks up just it being a complete text based book, which is again another refreshing thing for someone who reads a lot of books.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. And the book is very visual. Jake and I, first and foremost, we are designers, and we worked in the tech industry for a long time, and we wanted to design a book that fit into people's lives, that was useful and usable, that didn't feel like this big thing you had to sit down and read from cover to cover, but that you could flip through. You could grab onto an illustration or a diagram that appealed to you, and dive in and just get something out of it. So I'm really glad you said that. And it is worth noting that the illustrations are actually they were created by Jake Knapp.
Oh, sweet.
By my co-author. So in addition to his many skills as a designer and a writer, he's also quite a good illustrator. So that's just a fun little tidbit about the book.
John, awesome talking with you. Thanks for being here. And again, everybody check out the book. It's going to be great. So I'll link up to this in the show notes. And John, thanks for being on the show.
Great. Thank you so much. I really had a good time. Appreciate it.
So I'm curious if you're going to start approaching your days by picking a highlight. Again, this is one of those things where I'm not necessarily going to do it on a daily basis. I'm going to do it more on a weekly basis and say, here are the things that I'm looking forward to this week on individual days, because, I'm more of a cyclical, seasonal, whatever you want to call it, person. But I'd love for you to check out the book. Again, like I said, this book has a lot in it that I'm going to unpack a bit more myself as it applies to me as I go through the book again in a solo episode upcoming. But if you want to grab the book, you can go over to the show notes for this episode at beyondthetodolist.com/250. There you'll find the button to also share this episode. I would love for you to hit the share button, share it via email, social networks, etc. Subscribe if you're not subscribed, and I look forward to seeing you next episode.